This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Yes, hello. It's me, your host, Harry Wilkinson. And welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show for the week of January 20th, 2013. Obviously, it's a very special weekend. It's inauguration weekend, where we're about to inaugurate for a second term the first biracial, or as some would like to also say, the first African American president. And it really is, it's quite a moment, and it's still a special moment, even 4 years after the first inauguration. And it is even more compelling, of course, on the fact that it takes place on Martin Luther King's birthday, January the 21st. A kind of, tribute and an acknowledgement of somewhat of his dream being reached. So it is a very powerful weekend, and something that is building in energy here in Washington, D.C., where I sit. You can feel the energy rising. You can feel the power of the moment, if you will. And I'm hopeful that people will take this power of this moment that's coming up, actually tomorrow, Monday, that they'll take it and use it as inspiration, and use it as something to help them remember who and what we are, remember why we came here. Martin Luther King was good at reminding us about that, and he, in his lifetime, I think, more and more understood that. It's not something that we're comfortable with all the time, and it's not a knowledge that just you attain all of a sudden. It's an awareness that builds over time as you grow and as you experience and as you participate in what I call the illusion or the hologram that is a life as we have created it. And when I say illusion, I'm not trying to be dismissive. When I say the world that we are participating in, the world that we do our day-to-day business in, and all of the things that we spend so much time arguing and worrying and fretting about and thinking are real, simply aren't. They simply aren't reality. They're an illusion, but they're an illusion we've created that allows us an important release, an important opportunity to play and experience and grow and, well, even not so much grow, but reawaken, become reaware of who and what we really are. That's the theme that runs through this show all the time. That's how we look at the days and weeks, events, and the media and entertainment and everything else in our world from that lens, from the lens of, this is a story we're creating, this is a hologram we're participating in, and look what we're doing. So, in that vein, I'd like to talk a little bit about, as I said, this extraordinary moment that we're in now, which, interestingly enough, has a lot of different elements involved in it. There's a shadow, if you will, that kind of hangs over this moment, a moment when we're talking so deeply about violence, the nature of violence, gun violence in particular, when there's a raging debate about how we deal with these things, and what can be done through a legislative process as well as through a human process to change these violent acts and keep them from occurring as regularly as they seem to. And it's interesting, this being both the inauguration weekend and particularly Martin Luther King's birthday, a man who preached nonviolence and used nonviolence as a tool to change people's thoughts, to change people's attitudes. He used nonviolence, as I say, as a tool. In a way, he used nonviolence as a weapon, if you will. When you are outnumbered, when you are surrounded by opponents armed to the teeth, as King and those who marched for civil rights were, you can't hope to outnumber your opponent. You can't hope to outarm your opponent. He understood that engaging in the same mindset that they were fighting against wasn't going to help. The idea that you can stand up to someone who has a gun in your face, unarmed, unafraid, and ready to talk to that person on a human level, ready to tell them what you're doing, what you're threatening doesn't scare me. You can't take away anything from me. I'm concerned about you with the gun in your hand and the belief that somehow putting bullets through other people will help you, will bring you justice, will bring you safety. That's a very powerful tool and not very well understood in this day and time. This day and time, particularly in this country, when we believe that to protect ourselves, we need guns, we need arms. That having a gun is a way of protecting yourself. That's an illusion. And not only is that just an illusion, that's an insanity. And we talked about this insanity and how, I won't say funny, but because it's not funny, but how kind of silly it is to be appalled at the level of violence that occurs in our media, to be appalled at a horrible shooting, when we are accepting of the very insanity that causes these things. When you say that it's acceptable, not only acceptable, but fun to hunt for sport, to shoot living things for fun, okay, that's insane. And I don't know how to explain that anymore to anybody. If we've lost the understanding that that's a form of insanity, I don't know where we go from there. There's no real conversation to have. We're just dealing with insanity, basically. Okay. Equally insane is the thought that you somehow protect yourself by having guns in the house. Statistics show that to actually be the opposite. Statistics show that you're more likely to hurt yourself, hurt others, and by a large margin if you have a gun in the house. Weapons and the idea behind weapons, once you engage in that and accept that part of it is okay, part of that insanity is okay, then you've accepted all of the insanity. And so you should try to make these changes. As I pointed out last week, you should try to do all of the legislative changes that people are trying to do. You should speak out against it. You should engage in that whole illusory hologram that we're creating around gun violence. But the fact of the matter is, once you've accepted that a certain level of insanity is okay, you've accepted the entire insanity. So you're going to have that insanity. So what you're doing is it's playing a little game, but it's not going to change anything until the deeper understanding emerges. And that's where we're going with it, by the way. I mean, we create these incidents, we create these holograms to play in so that we start to really understand who and what we really are, and that none of this is real. It's hard to say that to someone who's lost a loved one physically. It's hard to say that to someone who believes that we are our bodies, and that when our bodies go, we're gone, that nothing else of us exists. Because when you believe that, then obviously the loss of the body is the loss of all. And you'll do anything to protect and or avenge that loss. And that's where the real illusion begins. That's where the fear factor comes in. All of this, as I talked about last week, is all fear-based stuff. But I wanted to look at this in, the lens of Martin Luther King's birthday. Man who preached nonviolence, as I said. He was a religious man, but he was also a spiritual man. And I talk about on this show all the time the difference between religion and spirituality, and how quite often they not only don't go together, they are working in opposite directions. But in the case of Martin Luther King, he was a spiritual man who also used the trappings of religion to help in the physical world, in the hologram, if you will, to bring forward greater awareness, greater spiritual awareness. He was able to, through his own religion and the trappings of his religion, which he knew very well and was well versed in, he was able to use it and rise above it to communicate to all, to be inclusive in his vision and in his thoughts, and to bring home the truths that go beyond religion. Those truths that go beyond a dogma. That's what spirituality is. And he was able to do that very effectively. What I'm reminded of in talking about this gun violence is what Martin Luther King understood about our connectedness and our oneness. There are a couple of quotes from his speeches that show that he understood this connectedness, this underlying unity. The first one is something that actually President Obama used in a speech, I think, this time a year ago. And it's about his belief of the oneness of men. And his words were, these are Martin Luther King's words, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny." Lovely, isn't it? Let's say it again. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And the other quote that shows that awareness of his, he says, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." And that's the reality that we're talking about, the reality of oneness. The reality that, we are one together. And I'm reminded of Martin Luther King's last speech. It's called the "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. And at that time, he knew that there were enormous threats against his life. He was aware of it, and he also seemed to have a very strong intuition about what was to come. And basically, what he said was, "I've been to the mountaintop." Well, I'll read you the whole quote. "I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." So he's talking about this promised land, this vision that he has, this connectedness, the unity that we're talking about. That is the promised land. And he's talking about how he's seen it, how he had a glimpse of it, how it has revealed to himself. And it's something I think he had to grow into, to evolve into, as we all do. But what he says is, "I may not get there with you, but I'm not worried about that. I'm not fearing any man." So, obviously, we know how he died. And it would seem to negate everything that he worked for in his nonviolent approach, that he died by the hands of violence. And there are some that would argue that if there'd been more armed people around him, or if he had been armed himself, that he wouldn't have been assassinated, that he could have stopped that man from taking his life. But here's the thing. Now, everything that we know about Dr. King, about who he was as a man and about what he was trying to do as a public figure, would tell us that he wouldn't want to live that way. He would want to live behind an armed wall of soldiers. He wouldn't want to be armed himself. And he wouldn't take the life of another man, even if that man threatened him. Because he's not worried about anything, as he says. He's not fearing any man, because his eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He knows. He knows that this is an illusion. And he knows that he's not going to lose anything. Oh, yes, you lose things you've become attached to. You've learned. You lose a certain form or of existence that you've been involved in, and that, of course, is always difficult. But being the spiritual man that he was, he understood not only what was at stake, but he also understood what the truth was. The truth that we are not our bodies. We are free. And that takes us, to another man of peace, Jesus. And, Jesus, when the guards came to get him in the Garden of Gethsemane, those around him, his disciples, wanted to protect him. I believe it was, they had been Mark, I'm not sure which one, but they picked up swords and were going to fight off these soldiers to protect him. And Jesus admonished them and told them to put down the sword, that he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Another, powerful moment of truth. And this was another man who, obviously it wasn't guns. For him it was nails. Ouch. But he understood, again, that once you shuffle off this mortal coil, you are not your body. You are free. So, whether or not you believe in the teachings of the church that sort of grew up around the words of Jesus, what we do know is that he did exist, and he did die that way. And we also know that most of the words attributed to him, just through historical checking and everything that we know, most of the words attributed to him he did actually say. And what's remarkable about that is that this man, who was a small-time cult leader, if you will, for his time, and there were many like him who were preaching and speaking out, and who had, small groups of believers, and he was one of many. The fact that over time the words he was speaking have remained with us and continued to touch people's lives, that says a lot. That says he was speaking truth, because truth is what resonates. Truth is what we hold on to. So, even the most hardcore atheist in the world has to understand that, number one, Jesus did live. Number two, he did say what he said. Number 3, he did die the way he died. And number 4, his words stay with us and still resonate to many people. The actions and beliefs of the churches that have grown up around those words and around his name are another matter altogether. And Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy is very much the same. The words he spoke, because they spoke truth, real truth, stay with us, no matter what your belief system might be. So I want to, at the end here, kind of close out with talking about a gentleman who I've spoken about on the show before, but definitely bears repeating. His name is Steven Pinker. He is what they call an evolutionary psychologist. In other words, he believes that our psychology evolves in the same way that our physical biology evolves. As we grow, we become enlightened, we become more aware, and his most recent book was called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and that's a quote actually from another President Lincoln. And in this book, he tells how and why not only are our aggressive tendencies and our violence declining in the world, but that we are living in a time now that is less cruel, less violent, and less ignorant than in any previous century. And this is worldwide. And he has statistics and research that clearly point to that. And he looks back at history, going all the way back to the time of, the Aztecs, and looking at Europe in its bloodiest periods, like the 17th century. And shows how we are engaged in a sort of civilizing process. Particularly in the 17th and 18th century, he talks about how the movement called the Enlightenment changed people's thinking about things. They began to look askance at forms of violence that they had previously taken for granted: slavery, torture, dueling, all of those things that were just part of the everyday fabric. They began to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is, kind of cruel, and maybe we shouldn't do this. And so we've talked about the book, and I'm running short on time, but what he has to say about what's going on today, and particularly in light of the shooting we recently had, here's what he has to say about it. The rampage shootings in the U.S. are not readily explained. 3 things go into them: mental illness, low status that triggers a desire for revenge and desire for fame, even posthumously, killing innocent people the only way of becoming famous. In that way, rampage killers overlap with suicide terrorists. And he says rampage killings are extraordinarily rare. In the U.S., though 27 people were killed in Newtown, 40 people are killed every day, and the media doesn't cover those killings. We are not in a social collapse. This is an illusion created by excessive media coverage of the most dramatic, violent events, because we have a media that likes to tell that story. So, until next time, and we will get more into this next time, please enjoy the Martin Luther King holiday and reflect on how far we've come and how far we're going. Have a great week.